Get started. Good to be with everybody. Happy Monday. So today we're going to talk about the past and our pasts and how we make sense of them and how do we use them to our advantage. And the meaning of our past experiences, of course, are highly personal for us. So you have to draw your own conclusions. But there's ways which we can look at our pasts and understand, how they influence us and how they help us move forward. As you guys know, or many of you might know, I'm a kind of a history. Uh, uh, I want to say history nut, but I appreciate history and its lessons. And I never can figure out who this quote is attributable to, but it's hard to know where you are, where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And we've all heard this quote, and I think that's really true. And I'll just kind of uh, uh, just divert just for a second. So, when we got into this pandemic, one of the first things I did was look at the 1918 pandemic and try to say, okay, well, what happened then? No two circumstances are identical, but they share certain things. And one of the things you looked at with the 1918 pandemic is it took 4 years to get out of it. And if you take the differences between now and then, greater population, but better technology, better medical distribution facility, infrastructure, and things like that. We kind of looked at it and said, well, it took them 4 years then, might take us 2 years now. So like all of our planning had like a 2 year cycle to it. So anyway, so the histories around us and then our personal histories are important to understand because they give us kind of a primer, kind of the keys to the code about how things can develop in the future and what options we have. So I'm always very interested in understanding whether it's at a personal level or at a business level or from just doing some fun history research, right? About knowing where have we been, because that in many ways will determine where we're going. And so one of the things about our pasts is that, does the past affect the future or does the future affect the past? And both of these are right. So we look at time as being very linear. And of course, we had to, I had to leave my house in Keene today by 7:15 to get here so I can get ready and start at 9 o'clock, right? So that's linear time. I have to follow linear time. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here now. So we have linear time, but then we have this kind of non-linear time where if we can understand how our past circumstances, so if we can kind of reach back into our past and understand how our past circumstances have shaped who we are today, and how our past, if we understand them, do affect our future, and actually vice versa. So actually both are right. Both our past affects our future, and actually in how we view our past affects that past event. And so let me just address that just a little bit deeper. So we can have an event in our past that we could look at and we could label it bad. However, if that event changed our lives in a way that we understood, and it positively affected us because we learned from that event, and it positively affect the future outcome of events, would we go back and would we still consider that past experience we had as bad, or would we label it good? Even though it might have been challenging, it might have been trying, it could have been, any number of things. So it's important really in how we look at past events, because past events help us move forward. They give us the building blocks and the information to move forward. And if we can look at our past events, if we understand how they positively affected us today or enriched us with more information, and then it allows us to look back at them in a whole different view than maybe when we experienced them the first time. Or maybe we have looked at an event. You could go through life. You could go through life. You could look at something that was 30 years ago, and you could characterize it as being, well, maybe not the best thing that happened. But all of a sudden, you're in this one event now, today, 30 years later, and all of a sudden, you realize what you learned from that event, the 30 years ago that you've been labeling for 30 years as being, really not so good, and realize how that helped you, okay, achieve, helped you help somebody else, helped you modify your situation today based on what you learned into a positive. And then doesn't that really help you look at that event at 30 years ago that maybe you've been carrying around for 30 years as being bad? You look at it, you say, you know what? Thank God I had that. So that's how the past and the present really all affect each other. I think it's very powerful. And how we understand our past experiences and what can affect our present and future outcomes. And our past and future outcomes influences how we view our past experiences. And so in this way, as we were just talking about, in this way, the past and the future are all really still interacting at the same time, you know? So although, in a linear sense, we have a timeline that we have to follow, we have appointments and calendars and the mortgage is due on a certain day and all this type of stuff. Yep, so we have to do that. But in another way, though, our past experiences to the future, the correlation between the past and the future is very circular. And really, we, as we were just talking about, we really can take a look at our past experiences. And if we understand how they've influenced us and how they've propelled us, and really in many cases, how they have propelled us to either overcome or achieve or help others, or just giving us some wisdom, right? It changes the whole relationship, completely changes it. And then we're more empowered. Positive energy is infinitely greater than negative energy. And so the more positively we can look at things, and the more we can go back, like we're talking about this morning, go back into future events and really kind of pull their meaning forward and understand really the powerful impact that they've had on our lives, okay? That is amazingly enriching. And so what I'd encourage you to do is think about the past and the present and the future. You think about it as a continuous loop, because it's all working together. It's just a matter of, do we allow it, right? And because we live in a linear time frame, we can look back at a past event. We can look back on it and say, oh, geez, I want to go through that again. But maybe if you understood how it conditioned you and trained you and shaped your thinking, then maybe you would look back on it and say, that was tough, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't trade it for $1 million. I'm so thankful I had that experience. And one of the expressions, we've used this before, it's one of my favorite expressions, is that wisdom is the experience without the emotion. Again, I can never find out who said this, but I picked it up along the way, not my words. And I think we get kind of judgy about things, and I think that limits our perspective. So when we get kind of judgy about something, okay, we automatically narrow the field of understanding. So by labeling something, we automatically bring the field very small, which means what we're going to learn out of it becomes very, very finite, okay, if anything at all. So when we get judgy about something, that was bad, that's the worst thing that ever happened to me, okay? And we've all done it, so none of us get a pass on that one. But what happens as soon as we start labeling that, the field of potential goes from this to this, and maybe even less than this. So, when we have the ability to look back, and sometimes it takes distance, okay? I used that example just a few minutes ago about, 30 years ago. Well, sometimes it takes that. Sometimes, when we have an experience in our past, what we learn from it, it's not instant. It's not like you have this experience and 10 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, I'm wise now. It doesn't work that way. So it takes however long it takes for the wisdom of the experience to accumulate. And sometimes if the situation is traumatic enough or meaningful enough, okay, you have to let the emotion burn off, so that you can then gain the wisdom, because you then appreciate the experience without the judginess of emotion. And that's why I like this quote, right? Because this quote really is giving space. It's giving space to say, well, wisdom is the experience without the emotion. I had this experience in my past, and I no longer judge it emotionally. I no longer call it something. It just happened. And from that, I've learned. And that learning has helped me deal with, these things positively. So, I would encourage you to kind of think about this phrase and kind of work it in your kind of, your mental vocabulary. Okay. Wisdom is the experience without the emotion, because what you're doing is you're taking the experience and you're peeling away the emotion. You're putting it over here. It's not to say that you don't have the emotion, and it's not to say that you don't maybe feel the poignancy of that emotion, because you don't want to ever ignore your emotions. You just don't want to become the emotion, right? That's how people act out. That's how behavior gets to be a certain way, is when someone starts acting out their emotions. Let your emotions wash over you. When you're starting to feel emotional about something, or maybe a little judgy about something, there are some visualization tools you can use. Like, just think about a stream and the rocks in the stream, and just pretend you're one of the rocks, and the emotion, the water, is just flowing over you. Okay, just let it wash. Think about it in terms of just let it wash over you. And once you do that, then all of a sudden you can take that experience, and then you understand kind of the beautiful nature of it, and why you have it, because it was custom designed for you at some level. Very powerful. I really appreciate the words and the message that's being conveyed with the wisdom as the experience without the emotion. So then how do we view our past? So know that each experience is custom designed for you. And it's not just for that moment, but it's for many future moments. And look at all your experiences as a continual teaching moment, regardless of when they occurred. Because I had an athletic coach one time, and it took me a while to kind of get this, right? Because when you're in your teens, aside from thinking that you're bulletproof, you don't get a lot, right? And as I've gotten older, I appreciate this more and more. And what he would always tell us, usually before a game, is he'd say, nobody can take your experiences away from you, so go out and have fun tonight. Usually they're night games. And and I think that's true, right? Once you have an experience, it's your experience to do what you want with it. And if you use it wisely, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And so and it really doesn't matter. It could have been 50 years ago, it could have been 20 years ago, it could have been 10 minutes ago. It really doesn't matter. But they're continual teaching moments if we embrace them. And I think what happens too, right, is when we look back on something, and I guess my word of the morning is judgy. So if we look back on something that happened so many years ago, pick 25 years ago, and we become judgy about it, what happens is we all of a sudden write it off. Well, I don't want to think about that, and then we banish it to the back recesses of our minds. We have these like these compartments in our minds, and we negotiate with ourselves. Well, what, experience, I'm not going to think about you, and if you don't remind me of you, I'm just going to put you in this box, and I'm just going to let you live in this box somewhere in my brain. Okay. And that's what happens when we judge things. We tend to just cast them away. But if we don't do that, then what we're talking about here, the experience becomes a continual teaching moment. And it's a great gift, because it just keeps giving and giving and giving. And then over time, you start to dissect it a little more. You understand, oh, wait a minute, I had this experience. It's pretty amazing, really, because every experience we have is custom designed for us. And when you start to peel it back, there's layers and layers and layers of information. And I think going back to the last slide about but like, let's get rid of the emotion as fast as we can. And then let's look at the experience and how do we gain the wisdom out of it. So I think our past experiences are super important, and they really help us set the stage for what possible outcomes we can have in the future. But if we disregard them, if we disregard our past, or we label our past, okay, then we really deny ourselves. We cheat ourselves, like cheating on a diet. We cheat ourselves from having the richness that of that experience that we're supposed to have. I don't want to get into this now, but if you've ever read anything about Oprah's life, read about her early life. It's a really good example of how you're using experiences, past experiences, to move forward. So let's just see what we got in the chat room here. This was a fun topic. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I do. Yeah, great comment from Denise. Yeah, be grateful for the lessons. Yeah, yeah. There's something about living in gratitude, regardless of the circumstances. I think I've mentioned this to this group. I had a sports injury that was pretty significant, when I was younger, and really did change my life completely. And I remember going through it at the time, and it was pretty devastating. So I was a good athlete, and my whole persona was kind of wrapped up in that, But I look back on it, I think to myself, what a gift, because it taught me how to be thoughtful about remaking myself, and that it gave me kind of a different perspective about, well, yeah, I had this view, yesterday, but today I have to have a different view, because that one no longer exists anymore. So I can't live in that moment. I got to find new moments to live in. So, and everyone has those. Everyone's life is rich. So, Ron, yeah, wisdom cannot be taught. It's a learning event. Yeah, Jody, that's a great quote. I've never seen that. The struggle ends when the gratitude begins. I love that. If you could email that to me, I'll put it in next week's PowerPoint so that we can share it with everybody. That's great. I love that. Yeah, that's super. Yeah. Yeah. So be grateful. We'll end with Jody's quote. How about that? So let's be grateful for all of our past experiences, and let's use them wisely. So, well, good to be with you, and have a great week.